My name is Samuel, but everyone calls me Sam. I'm 70 years old, and on what should have been the happiest day of my life, my 70th birthday, everything changed. My own daughter stood up, said just a few words, and in seconds, I went from father to stranger. I'm going to tell you what they did to me, how the people I raised, loved, and sacrificed everything for turned their backs on me when I needed them most. But before I begin, please let me know in the comments. Where are you watching this from? To everyone here supporting this community, thank you. Your messages keep me going. They remind me I'm not invisible, that my story matters. And if this is your first time here, do me a favor, like, subscribe, and hit the bell. You're not just joining a channel, you're joining a family that believes no one should suffer in silence. Now, let me tell you my story. I woke up on March 15th, my 70th birthday, with that familiar ache in my chest. Not the physical kind, though my heart's not what it used to be. This was deeper, the kind of ache you get when you realize you've been holding your breath for 23 years, waiting for something that might never come. The house was quiet. It's always quiet now. Used to be, this place would explode with noise on my birthday. Sarah running down the stairs in her pajamas, Michael trailing behind with some handmade card that looked like a tornado hit a craft store. Emma would already be in the kitchen, flour in her hair, making pancakes shaped like my age. 70 pancakes would have killed me, but she would have tried. That was before the cancer took her, before I learned what it means to be both mother and father to two kids who needed more than I knew how to give. I made my coffee, the same mug I've used for 15 years, the one Sarah gave me that says, "World's okayest dad." She meant it as a joke back then. Now it feels prophetic. I'd been planning this call for weeks, rehearsing it, actually. Pathetic, right? A grown man practicing how to talk to his own children. But that's what happens when conversations become performances, when every word gets weighed against the possibility of saying the wrong thing and watching them pull further away. Sarah's number was still in my favorites, right at the top, where it's been since she got her first phone. I pressed call before I could lose my nerve. 2 rings. 3. For a moment, I thought it might go to voicemail, and part of me almost hoped it would. Voicemail is safer. Voicemail doesn't have the power to break your heart in real time. Hello? Her voice sounded different, distant, like she was talking through glass. Sarah, sweetheart, it's Dad. A pause. Too long. When your children are small, pauses don't exist. They talk over you, through you, around you. Everything is urgent and important and needs to be said right now. But adult children, they pause. They consider. They decide how much of themselves they're willing to give you. Oh, hi, Dad. Happy birthday. 2 words that should have meant everything. Instead, they landed like pennies in an empty well. Hollow. Obligatory. Thank you, honey. I was hoping... Well, I know you're busy, but I thought maybe we could do something today. Dinner, maybe. I could cook, or we could go out. Your choice. Another pause. Longer this time. I could hear voices in the background, her kids, my grandchildren, laughing about something, life happening without me. Actually, Dad, we're having a family dinner tonight. Just us and the kids. Just us. Those 2 words hit harder than anything else she could have said. Just us, as if I wasn't part of that equation. As if 35 years of scraped knees and bedtime stories and mortgage payments had somehow disqualified me from the family I'd built with my bare hands. Oh, I tried to keep my voice steady. Where are you going? Maybe I could... It's at Romano's, 7 o'clock. Romano's. The same restaurant where I'd taken them every birthday when they were kids. Where Sarah had her sweet 16 dinner. Where Michael announced he was getting married. Our place. Or what used to be our place. That sounds nice, I said, already reaching for my good shirt in my mind. Should I meet you there, or do you want me to pick up Mom and... Dad? Her voice cut through my planning like a knife. It's not really your family anymore. The words hung in the air between us like smoke from a house fire. Everything I'd built, everything I'd sacrificed for, reduced to 6 words that rewrote history. That made me a stranger in my own story. I don't remember what I said after that. Something about understanding, probably. Something about being fine on my own. The kind of lies you tell when the truth is too big to fit through your throat. She hung up first. She always hangs up first now. I sat in my kitchen. Our kitchen, the one where Emma taught Sarah how to crack eggs without getting shell in the bowl, where Michael did homework at the table while I cooked dinner after 16-hour shifts, and stared at my phone. 70 years old. And for the first time in my life, I felt every single day of it. I should have let it go. Any reasonable person would have let it go. Should have ordered Chinese food, watched some old movie, maybe called my brother in Phoenix and pretended everything was fine. But reasonable went out the window the moment my daughter told me I wasn't family anymore. You have to understand something about the man I am. The man I've had to become. When Emma died, I didn't have the luxury of falling apart. Sarah was 8, Michael was 6, and they needed someone who could pack lunches and sign permission slips and remember that Thursday was library day. I became that person. Not because I was naturally good at it, but because the alternative was watching my children suffer more than they already had. I learned to braid hair by watching YouTube videos at 2 in the morning. I figured out the difference between a fever that needs a doctor and a fever that needs soup and cartoons. I showed up to every school play, every soccer game, every parent-teacher conference, usually straight from a job site with concrete dust still on my boots. And now, 23 years later, I wasn't family anymore. I spent the afternoon trying to distract myself, cleaned the garage, organized my tool shed, called my brother anyway and listened to him talk about his grandkids for an hour, normal grandpa stuff, the kind of relationship I thought I'd have with Sarah and Michael's children. But by 6:30, I was in my car. I told myself I was just going for a drive. Maybe I'd stop by the grocery store, pick up some milk. Maybe I'd drive past the old house where we lived when the kids were small, the one with the tire swing I hung from the oak tree in the backyard. Instead, I found myself pulling into the parking lot across from Romano's. I could see them through the window. My family. The family I wasn't part of anymore. Sarah sat facing the street, her dark hair pulled back the same way Emma used to wear hers when she was concentrating on something important. She was cutting food for the little one, my granddaughter Lily, who just turned 6 last month. The same age Michael was when Emma died. Michael was there too, laughing at something his wife had said. His wife, Jennifer, who's actually a lovely person, who sends me Christmas cards and asks about my health when we run into each other at the grocery store, who probably doesn't know her husband helped orchestrate this dinner that didn't include the man who raised him. And the kids. God, the kids. Lily with her wild curls and her gap-toothed grin, so much like Sarah at that age it takes my breath away. And Marcus, 8 now, serious and careful like Michael was. They were both dressed up, probably their idea of fancy dinner clothes, the kind of effort children make when they think something is special. I watched them for 20 minutes. 20 minutes of my own grandchildren's laughter floating through glass I couldn't break. 20 minutes of watching my son tell stories with his hands the same way I used to. 20 minutes of seeing my daughter mother her children with the same fierce attention Emma had given to her. They looked complete, happy, like they didn't need the broken old man sitting in a Honda Civic crying in a restaurant parking lot. But here's what I noticed, and here's what I think about now when I can't sleep. They kept looking at the door. All of them. Sarah glanced over at least 6 times. Michael checked his watch twice. Even the kids seemed to be waiting for something. Or someone. I started the engine around 7:30. The dinner was clearly winding down. Jennifer was gathering up crayons and Lily was fighting the kind of battle with sleepiness that 6-year-olds always lose. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going home to get something I'd kept hidden for 23 years. Something Emma made me promise to keep secret unless I absolutely needed it. Tonight, Sitting outside that restaurant like some kind of ghost from their past, I realized I absolutely needed it. Because if I wasn't family anymore, they needed to know why that was the cruelest thing they could have said. They needed to know what family actually meant to the woman who gave them life. And they needed to know what she'd asked me to do if this day ever came. Back home, I stood in my living room and looked around at 23 years of single fatherhood. The couch I'd fallen asleep on countless nights, too exhausted to make it to bed after working a double shift and helping with homework. The bookshelf full of parenting guides I'd read by flashlight so the kids wouldn't know their father was making it up as he went along. The framed pictures that told the story they seemed to have forgotten. Sarah's high school graduation, me in my only good suit, crying harder than she was. Michael's wedding day, where he asked me to walk him down the aisle because, "You've been both parents anyway, Dad." Christmas mornings, birthday parties, first days of school. All of us learning how to be a family without the person who was supposed to teach us how. But tonight, I wasn't looking at the pictures. I was looking at the place I'd hidden Emma's final gift to me. Under the stairs, behind a loose board I'd never repaired, was a shoebox wrapped in one of Emma's old scarves. The kind of hiding place children use, which seemed fitting. Emma had wrapped this when our children were still children, when she could still hold them both on her lap and read them stories about families who lived happily ever after. My hands shook as I pulled it out. Not because I was afraid of what was inside. I'd read these letters dozens of times over the years, whenever I felt like I was failing, whenever I wondered if I was enough. I shook because I'd never thought I'd actually need to use them. Inside were 17 letters in Emma's careful handwriting. Letters to Sarah and Michael, to be opened on specific occasions. Their 16th birthdays, their graduations, their wedding days. Letters she'd written when she knew she was dying, but they didn't. And one letter addressed to me, with instructions I'd followed faithfully for over 2 decades. Thomas, if they ever turn against you, if they ever make you feel like you don't belong in the family we made together, show them what's in the envelope marked, "For when Dad needs them to remember." I'd looked at that envelope 100 times but never opened it. Until tonight. Inside were 3 things that would change everything. First, a letter to Sarah and Michael, dated 2 weeks before Emma died. My darling children, if your father is showing you this, it means I failed at something important. It means you've forgotten that love isn't something you earn or lose based on mistakes or misunderstandings. It means you've forgotten that the man reading this to you chose to be your father every single day for years, after I couldn't be your mother. I need to tell you something I made him promise never to tell you unless you forced his hand. Your father wanted to remarry. There was a woman, a wonderful woman named Patricia who worked at your school, Sarah. She loved your father, and more importantly, she loved both of you. She wanted to give you the mother you'd lost. Your father said no, not because he didn't love her, but because you weren't ready. Because every time he mentioned the possibility of dating, you both made it clear that no one could replace me. So he chose you. He chose loneliness over the chance that bringing someone new into our family might hurt you. He has been alone for over 20 years because he put your healing before his happiness. And if you're reading this, it means you've somehow decided that sacrifice doesn't matter, that the man who gave up love for you doesn't deserve yours in return. The second thing was a legal document I'd never seen before. Emma had met with a lawyer during her last month, had papers drawn up that I knew nothing about. Trust funds for both children that would only be accessible if certain conditions were met. College funds that would revert to charity if I died without the demonstrated love and support of my children. The house, our house, would go to a children's hospital if Sarah and Michael weren't actively caring for me in my old age. Emma had orchestrated everything. She'd created a safety net, not for them, but for me. She'd seen this day coming from 23 years away, and she'd planned accordingly. The third thing was a cassette tape, labeled, "For Sam, when you need to remember why." I hadn't owned a cassette player in 15 years, but I knew where to get one. Michael had kept his old boombox when he moved out, stored it in my garage with other things he might want someday. Emma's voice, weak but determined, filled my living room. "Sam, my love, if you're hearing this, they've broken your heart. And I'm so sorry. I tried to raise them better than this. I tried to teach them that family isn't just about blood. It's about showing up. It's about choosing each other every day, especially when it's hard. You showed up, Sam. For 23 years, you showed up. You were never perfect, but you were always there. And if our children can't see that, if they've become the kind of people who would abandon the man who never abandoned them, then they need to learn what family really costs. Don't let them break you. You are not disposable. You are not a burden. You are the father who stayed when staying was the hardest thing in the world. Show them the papers. Tell them the truth. Make them choose again. But this time, make sure they understand what they're choosing." I sat in my living room until 3 in the morning, listening to my dead wife's voice and planning what I would do next. They thought they could erase me from the family story. They thought they could rewrite history to make me the outsider. They had no idea what their mother had taught me about fighting for the people you love, even when those people had forgotten how to love you back. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with Emma's letters spread out like evidence in a case I was finally ready to prosecute. But as dawn broke through my windows, something Emma had written kept echoing in my mind. You were never perfect, but you were always there. She was right about the first part. I was far from perfect. Let me tell you about the man I really was during those years after Emma died. Not the saint my children might remember. Not the hero I sometimes pretend I was in my own head, but the broken, terrified father who had no idea what he was doing. I made mistakes. God, did I make mistakes. There was the time Sarah got her first period, and I panicked so completely that I called my sister in tears, begging her to drive 4 hours to explain what I couldn't. Sarah sat in the bathroom for 2 hours while I fumbled through awkward phone calls, too embarrassed to just go to the store and buy what she needed. There was Michael's 8th grade dance where every other kid had a mother who knew about corsages and proper shoes and how to tie a tie that didn't look like a noose. I watched YouTube videos until midnight, practiced on myself in the mirror, and still sent my son to his first formal dance looking like he'd been dressed by someone who'd learned fashion from manual labor catalogs. I worked too much because I had to. 16-hour days weren't unusual. Concrete doesn't pour itself, and bills don't pay themselves. I missed school plays because I was on job sites. I sent store-bought cupcakes to class parties while other mothers sent homemade masterpieces that looked like they belonged in magazines. But here's what I never missed. Bedtime. Every single night, no matter how late I got home, no matter how exhausted I was, I tucked them in. Sometimes I fell asleep in Sarah's reading chair, still in my work boots, with a book about princesses open on my chest. Sometimes I had concrete dust in my hair while I listened to Michael practice his multiplication tables. I never missed a doctor's appointment, not one. I learned to take their temperature with my lips against their foreheads because that's what Emma used to do. I learned to make chicken soup from a can taste like love by adding extra crackers and sitting with them while they ate it. I never missed a nightmare. Sarah had them for 2 years after Emma died. Dreams where her mother came back but couldn't find her because she'd moved or changed or grown too much. I'd sit on the edge of her bed in the dark, rubbing her back and promising her that love doesn't get lost just because people do. Michael never cried about losing his mother, which scared me more than if he had. Instead, he became serious, careful, like he was afraid that showing too much emotion might make someone else disappear. So I showed emotion for both of us. I cried at his Little League games when he hit his first home run. I cried at parent-teacher conferences when his teachers told me what a good kid he was. I cried in grocery store parking lots when I saw families that looked complete in ways we never could. The truth is, I was drowning for the first 5 years. Every day felt like I was one mistake away from proving that a father couldn't do what a mother was supposed to do. Every scraped knee I bandaged wrong, every braid that came out crooked, every time I had to say, "I don't know, honey, but we'll figure it out together," felt like evidence that my children deserved better than what I could give them. But I kept showing up. Even when showing up meant admitting I had no idea what I was doing. Even when it meant calling my sister at midnight to ask if it was normal for a 10-year-old to suddenly hate the foods she used to love. Even when it meant learning to French braid hair from library books because YouTube didn't exist yet, and my daughter wanted to look like her friends. I wasn't perfect, but I was there. And as I sat at that table surrounded by Emma's words and the legal documents that proved she'd never stopped protecting our family, I realized something that changed everything. My children had rewritten history. They'd turned my imperfections into evidence that I was somehow less than the father they deserved, instead of understanding that perfection was never what made a family work. They'd forgotten the man who learned to be their mother when they needed mothering, who learned to be their friend when they needed friendship, who learned to be their safety net every single day for over 2 decades. Emma had seen this coming. She'd known that success might make them forget struggle, that their comfortable adult lives might make them embarrassed by the man who'd built that comfort one imperfect day at a time. Well, it was time to remind them. Not with anger, but with truth. It was time to show them the price of the love they'd decided they didn't need anymore. 3 days after my birthday, my phone rang at 7:43 a.m. I know the exact time because I was staring at the clock, wondering if it was too early to call Sarah and ask if we could talk, wondering if there was a statute of limitations on apologies, even when you weren't sure what you were apologizing for. The caller ID said Wilson and Associates. I almost didn't answer. In my experience, calls from law offices that early in the morning rarely brought good news. "Mr. Thompson, this is Margaret Wilson. I'm calling about your wife's estate." My wife's estate. After 23 years, lawyers were still calling about Emma's estate. "I'm sorry, Miss Wilson, but I think there's been some mistake. My wife's estate was settled decades ago." A pause, the sound of papers shuffling. "Mr. Thompson, I have some documents here that suggest otherwise. I think you need to come in. Today, if possible." 2 hours later, I sat in an office that smelled like leather and disappointment, across from a woman who couldn't have been older than my daughter. Margaret Wilson had kind eyes and the sort of precise way of speaking that made me think she'd been delivering difficult news to unprepared people for most of her career. "Mr. Thompson, I'm going to be direct with you because I think that's what you need right now. Your children contacted me 6 months ago." My stomach dropped. 6 months ago. While I was planning my 70th birthday, while I was hoping we could find our way back to being a real family again, they were meeting with lawyers. They wanted to understand the terms of their mother's will. Specifically, they wanted to know if there was any way to modify certain conditions that were put in place. She slid a folder across her desk. Inside were photocopies of documents I'd never seen, agreements Emma had apparently made without telling me. Trust funds, yes, but more than that. Educational funds for grandchildren I hadn't even met yet. A foundation set up in Emma's name that would fund scholarships for single fathers going back to school. And conditions. So many conditions. Your wife was very thorough, Mr. Thompson. She set up what's essentially a financial incentive system designed to ensure family cohesion. Your children can't access the majority of their inheritance unless certain benchmarks are met regarding your care and inclusion in family activities. I stared at the papers, recognizing Emma's thinking even in legal language. She'd always been the planner in our relationship, the one who thought 3 steps ahead while I was still figuring out step 1. "They want to contest the will?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "They tried. That's why they came to me. But Mr. Thompson, your wife didn't just write a will. She created a fortress. Every possible legal challenge has been anticipated and blocked. She worked with some very expensive lawyers to make sure these conditions couldn't be broken." Margaret leaned forward, her expression softening. "There's something else. Something I don't think your children understand yet. The conditions aren't just about money. If they successfully contest this will, if they manage to break the terms your wife set up, they don't just lose the inheritance. The entire estate, including funds already distributed for their homes, their children's college accounts, Even some business investments they don't know came from this trust. All of it gets donated to charity. What kind of charity? Organizations that support widowed fathers raising children alone. I almost laughed. Almost. Even from the grave, Emma was still thinking 10 moves ahead. But here's the thing, Mr. Thompson. I don't think she did this to trap them or punish them. I think she did it because she knew this day would come. The day when success and adult responsibilities might make them forget what family really means. She built a bridge back to you, but they have to choose to cross it. Margaret handed me another document. This was sealed until your 70th birthday. Instructions left specifically for you. Emma's handwriting again on legal letterhead. Sam. If you're reading this, they've hurt you. I'm so sorry. I tried to raise them to understand that family isn't disposable, but sometimes children need to learn lessons the hard way. Here's what you need to know. Every major financial decision they've made as adults has been supported by the trust I set up. Sarah's house down payment, Michael's business loan, the kids' private school tuition. They think they've built their lives independently, but they've been building on the foundation I created. You have a choice now. You can let them know about the conditions and give them a chance to make this right. Or you can activate the charity clause and let them learn about consequences the way adults have to. But Sam, remember what I always told you. Love is not about keeping score. It's about giving people chances to choose love again, even when they've chosen poorly before. The choice is yours, but make it with the same heart that raised our children when I couldn't. Choose love, even when they haven't. Emma. I sat in that law office for another hour, learning about trust funds and charity clauses and the intricate web Emma had woven to protect the family she couldn't stay to raise herself. When I left, I had 2 envelopes in my pocket. One contained information my children needed to know. The other contained the power to change their lives forever. And for the first time since my birthday dinner that wasn't, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Control. Emma had given me the ability to choose how this story ended. The question was, what kind of man was I going to be with that power? Saturday morning, I was replacing a broken fence slat in my backyard when I heard the car doors slam in my driveway. 2 doors, adult voices, children's laughter. For just a moment, my heart jumped the way it used to when the kids were small and would surprise me by coming home early from sleepovers or school trips. That split second of pure joy before reality caught up and reminded me that surprise visits weren't normal anymore, that my children were adults who made appointments to see their father if they saw him at all. I walked around to the front of the house, still holding my hammer, and stopped dead. Sarah's car was parked behind Michael's truck. All 4 grandchildren were piling out of the vehicles, arms full of bags and what looked like groceries. Michael was lifting a cooler from his truck bed. Sarah was directing the chaos with the sort of organized authority I remembered from when she was 12 and decided our family camping trips needed military-level coordination. "Grandpa!" Lily spotted me first, broke free from the group and launched herself at my legs with a sort of full-body hug that nearly knocked me over. I looked over her head at my adult children, confused. Sarah avoided my eyes. Michael cleared his throat and adjusted his grip on the cooler. "Hey, Dad," Sarah said, finally looking at me. "We brought lunch. Hope that's okay." It wasn't okay. It was surreal. After 3 days of stewing in lawyers' offices and Emma's revelations, after 23 years of scheduled visits and carefully managed interactions, here they were acting like showing up unannounced was normal. "Of course it's okay," I said, "because that's what you say. Because even when your children confuse you, even when they hurt you, you don't turn them away from your door. You just surprised me." Marcus, Michael's 8-year-old, was studying the fence I'd been repairing with the sort of intense focus he brought to everything. "Grandpa, this board is different from the others." "Good eye," I told him. "Sometimes things break and you have to fix them with whatever wood you can find. It doesn't match, but it does the job." Michael and Sarah exchanged a look I couldn't read. "Kids, Why don't you help Grandpa set up the picnic table while Mom and I get the food ready? Sarah suggested, though it sounded more like a politely worded order. Suddenly, I was surrounded by grandchildren arranging napkins and arguing about who got to carry the paper plates. Normal chaos, the kind I'd forgotten I missed until it was happening in my backyard again. But I watched my adult children moving around my kitchen like they were casing the joint. Sarah opened cabinets with the sort of familiarity that suggested this wasn't as spontaneous as they wanted me to believe. Michael checked the refrigerator and frowned at what he found there, or more likely, what he didn't find there. "Dad, are you eating enough?" Sarah called through the window. The question hit wrong, not because she was asking, but because of how she was asking. Like a social worker doing a wellness check, like someone gathering evidence. "I eat fine," I called back, then wondered why I sounded defensive. Lunch was potato salad and sandwiches and the sort of small talk that families make when they're all thinking about something else. The kids filled the silence with stories about school and friends and the elaborate fairy house they were building in Marcus's backyard. Normal kid stuff that made everything feel almost normal. But I kept catching my children watching me. Sarah made sure I ate 2 sandwiches. Michael kept asking if I needed help with things that didn't need help. They were being attentive, carefully attentive. After lunch, while the kids played in the backyard, Sarah and Michael helped me clean up, which was when I realized this wasn't a social visit at all. "Dad, we need to talk," Michael said, setting down the dish towel with the sort of precision that meant he'd been rehearsing this conversation. Sarah nodded, suddenly looking younger than her 35 years. "We talked to a lawyer this week about Mom's will." There it was, the real reason for the surprise visit, the carefully managed lunch, the watchful eyes. They'd learned about Emma's conditions, and now they were here to… What? Check on their investment? "I see," I said, because I literally couldn't think of anything else. "Dad, we didn't know. About the trust, about the conditions, about any of it." Sarah's voice was small, almost childlike. "We just thought, when you got older, we thought it would be easier if I wasn't your responsibility anymore," I finished for her. Michael flinched. "That's not what we meant." "Isn't it?" I looked at both of them, these adults I'd raised who were now sitting in my kitchen like children called to the principal's office. "You told me I wasn't family anymore, Sarah, on my birthday. Those were your exact words." She started to cry, actual tears, the first ones I'd seen from her since Emma's funeral. "We were wrong," she whispered. "We were so wrong, Dad, but we don't know how to fix it." And here's what hit me in that moment. They weren't here because they'd learned about the money and realized they needed to be nice to me to keep their inheritance. They were here because they'd learned about the money and realized what it meant. They'd realized that their mother had seen their capacity for cruelty decades before they'd acted on it. That Emma had loved them enough to try to save them from becoming the kind of people who would abandon their father when he needed them most. They were here because they were ashamed. The lawyer said Mom set up conditions because she thought we might not take care of you the way we should, Michael said, staring at his hands. "Your mother was very smart," I said quietly. "Dad, we don't want the money," Sarah said suddenly. "We don't care about the trust or the conditions or any of it. We want to figure out how to be a family again, if you'll let us." And there it was. The moment Emma had orchestrated from 23 years away. The choice she'd given all of us. Choose love or lose everything that love had built. I looked at my children, these flawed, complicated adults who'd hurt me more deeply than I thought possible, and realized I had to make the same choice I'd been making since the day they were born. I chose them. Again. "Okay," I said. "Let's figure it out." 2 weeks after that awkward lunch, Sarah called and asked if she could come over alone. No kids, no Michael, just her and me and whatever conversation we'd been dancing around since they'd learned about Emma's conditions. She arrived at 7 on a Thursday evening, carrying a bottle of wine and the sort of nervous energy I remembered from when she was 16 and needed to confess she'd dented the car. I brought wine, she said, holding up the bottle like a peace offering. Remember when you used to let me have a sip of yours on special occasions? I always thought it tasted like liquid courage. I opened it, poured 2 glasses, and we sat on my back porch watching the sun set over the fence I'd never quite finished painting. For a few minutes, we were just a father and daughter sharing wine and comfortable silence. Then Sarah took a deep breath and said, "Tell me about Patricia." I nearly choked on my wine. Of all the conversations I'd imagined us having, this wasn't one of them. "Patricia?" Mom's letter mentioned a woman named Patricia, someone you could have married but didn't because of us. Her voice was carefully neutral, but I could hear the guilt underneath it. "I need to know about her, Dad. I need to understand what we cost you." I'd known this conversation would come eventually, once they'd processed Emma's revelations. But knowing something is coming and being ready for it are 2 different things entirely. "Patricia Henderson," I said, surprised by how easily her name still came. "She was the school secretary at Riverside Elementary when you were in 4th grade." Sarah nodded. "I remember her. She always had butterscotch candies in her desk drawer. She gave me one once when I had to wait in the office because you were late picking me up." "She was kind," I said simply, "and patient, and she understood what it was like to be a single parent because she'd raised her nephew after her sister died." What I didn't tell Sarah, what I'd never told anyone, was how Patricia had made me feel like I wasn't drowning for the first time since Emma died. How she'd packed an extra sandwich in her lunch and casually offered me half when she saw me eating vending machine crackers in the school parking lot between parent conferences. How she'd shown me the trick to getting grass stains out of baseball uniforms and never made me feel stupid for not knowing. How she'd kissed me one evening after a school fundraiser, soft and sweet and full of possibility, and how I'd kissed her back and felt like maybe I could be more than just a father struggling to keep his head above water. "You loved her," Sarah said. It wasn't a question. "I could have," I admitted. "Given time, I think I could have loved her very much. But you didn't marry her because of us." I turned to look at my daughter, this woman who had my chin and Emma's eyes and a capacity for guilt that seemed to run in our family like blue eyes or left-handedness. "Sarah, do you remember the Christmas you were 10? When I brought Patricia to our Christmas Eve dinner?" She nodded, her face already changing as the memory came back. "You and Michael spent the entire evening making sure she knew that no one could replace your mother. You were polite, but cold. Every time she tried to talk to you, you answered in monosyllables. When she brought presents, you said thank you but didn't open them until after she left." Sarah's wine glass trembled in her hands. "Oh, Dad, I remember. We were awful." "You were children processing grief the only way you knew how. But Patricia saw it too. She saw how much you both still needed your mother to be the only mother you'd ever had. And she understood that loving me meant signing up for a lifetime of competing with a ghost." I took a sip of wine and continued. "She told me she couldn't do it. Couldn't be the woman who broke up what was left of our family, even if that wasn't her intention. She said maybe in a few years, when you were older, when the grief wasn't so fresh. But you never tried again." "No. By the time you were old enough to understand that adults sometimes need love too, she'd moved away, married someone else, had her own family." Sarah was crying now, the quiet kind of tears that come when you realize the full weight of choices you made as a child. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. We ruined your chance at happiness because we were selfish and scared." "Sarah, look at me." I waited until she met my eyes. "You didn't ruin anything. You were children who'd lost their mother. Of course you weren't ready for someone new. Of course you needed time to heal. But you never got your time. You've been alone for 23 years because we couldn't handle sharing you." This was the conversation Emma had known we'd need to have. This was why she'd mentioned Patricia in her letter, why she'd forced us to confront the cost of the choices we'd all made. "I made my choice, Sarah. I chose you and Michael over the possibility of romantic love because you needed me to, and I've never regretted it. But don't you ever wonder what your life would have been like? With her? I thought about Patricia sometimes, especially on quiet Sunday mornings when the house felt too big and too empty. I wondered if she'd learned to make pancakes shaped like numbers, if she still kept butterscotch candies in whatever desk she sat behind now, if she remembered the man who'd almost been brave enough to choose love over fear. Sometimes, I admitted. But wondering about the life you didn't live is pointless if it keeps you from appreciating the life you did live. I got to be your father, Sarah. I got to raise you and Michael and watch you become the people you are. That's not a consolation prize. That's not settling for less. That's its own kind of love story. Sarah set down her wine glass and moved to the chair next to mine, the way she used to when she was small and needed comfort. How do we make this right, Dad? How do we give you back what we took? You can't, I said simply, and that's okay. But you can choose to be present now. You can choose to include me in the family I helped build. You can choose to let me be a grandfather to your children and uncle to your stories and witness to your lives. She leaned her head against my shoulder, and for a moment she was 8 years old again, needing her father to make sense of a world that had suddenly become too complicated to understand. I love you, Dad. I'm sorry it took Mom's conditions to remind me how to show it. I love you too, sweetheart. And your mother knew exactly what she was doing when she planned all this. We sat on that porch until the stars came out, talking about Patricia and Emma and the family we were learning to be again. And for the first time since my 70th birthday, I felt like maybe, just maybe, we were going to be okay. Emma had been right, as usual. Sometimes people need to lose something to remember why they wanted it in the first place. Sometimes love requires a little strategic engineering to find its way home. 3 months after Sarah and I talked about Patricia, she called with an invitation that would have seemed impossible on my 70th birthday. Dad, we want to take you out for dinner. All of us. The whole family. Will you come? This time, when she said family, I knew she meant me too. We met at Romano's, the same restaurant where I'd sat in my car watching them through the window, feeling like a ghost haunting his own life. But tonight was different. Tonight, I walked through the front door and saw my son waving me over to a table set for 8. 8. 2 adults, 4 grandchildren, and a space for me and the empty chair that would always belong to Emma, even when she wasn't physically there to fill it. Grandpa! Lily launched herself at me the moment I reached the table, and I realized this was becoming our greeting ritual, the kind of tradition that happens naturally in families that actually function like families. Marcus had saved the seat next to him, and he spent the first 10 minutes of dinner explaining the elaborate comic book story he was writing about a superhero whose power was fixing broken things. He can't make them like new, Marcus explained with 8-year-old seriousness, but he can make them work again, which is sometimes better. I looked at Michael and saw him listening to his son with the same expression I probably had when Michael used to tell me about his elaborate Lego constructions. Some things echo across generations. Sarah's youngest, Tommy, was 5 and had apparently decided that dinner conversation required audience participation. He provided sound effects for Marcus's comic book explanation and offered to share his French fries with everyone at the table, including strangers at neighboring tables. Jennifer, Michael's wife, seemed more relaxed than I'd seen her in years. She asked about my garden, about the fence I'd been repairing, about whether I needed help with anything around the house. Normal daughter-in-law questions. The kind that suggested I was a permanent fixture in their lives, not a problem to be managed. But it was Sarah who surprised me most. Halfway through dinner, she stood up and tapped her water glass with her fork. The table went quiet, the way families do when someone has something important to say. I want to make a toast, she said, looking directly at me. To Dad, who taught us that showing up is more important than being perfect, who proved that love isn't about getting everything right, it's about never giving up on the people who matter. She paused, and I could see her struggling with emotions that were too big for public spaces. 3 months ago, I told you that you weren't family anymore. It was the cruelest thing I've ever said to another human being. It was also the most untrue thing I've ever said to another human being. Michael nodded, his own eyes getting wet. Dad, we forgot what family means. We forgot that family isn't just about blood or tradition or obligation. It's about choosing each other, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. You chose us every day for 23 years, Sarah continued. When we were difficult teenagers, when we were struggling young adults, when we were so busy building our own lives that we forgot to make space for the man who made those lives possible. You chose us even when we stopped choosing you. She raised her water glass higher. So tonight, we're choosing you. Not because of trust funds or inheritance conditions or anything Mom set up to protect you. We're choosing you because you're our father. Because you earned your place in this family every single day since Mom died. Because we love you. To Dad, Michael said, raising his glass. To Grandpa, all four grandchildren chorused, raising their drinks with the sort of enthusiasm that made other diners turn and smile at our table. I couldn't speak, couldn't even begin to find words for what I felt in that moment. Instead, I raised my own glass and looked around the table at these people, my people, who had found their way back to me through Emma's careful planning and their own capacity for growth. To family, I managed finally. To the family we've always been, even when we forgot how to act like it. After dinner, as we walked out to the parking lot, Lily slipped her small hand into mine. Grandpa, are you coming to my birthday party next month? If you want me there, sweetheart. Of course I want you there. You're my grandpa. Grandpas come to birthday parties. That's the rule. From the mouths of babes, 6-year-olds understand family in ways adults sometimes forget. It's not complicated, it's not conditional, it's just what it is. Grandpas come to birthday parties, that's the rule. As I drove home that night, I thought about Emma and how she would have loved seeing her grandchildren laugh over dinner, seeing her adult children finally acting like the people she'd tried to raise them to be. She'd engineered this reconciliation from 23 years away, but she couldn't engineer the love that made it possible. That love had been there all along, buried under hurt and misunderstanding and the complicated business of being human. Sometimes it just takes a little strategic reminder to help people find their way home. 6 months after that dinner at Romano's, I found an envelope slipped under my front door. No postmark, no return address, just my name written in handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside was a letter that would change how I understood everything that had happened over the past year. Dear Mr. Thompson, you don't know me, but I know you. My name is Patricia Henderson, or Patricia Martinez now, I suppose, since I remarried 15 years ago. I was Patricia Henderson when you knew me, when your children were small and I was the secretary at Riverside Elementary. I've been thinking about you a lot lately, wondering how your life turned out, hoping that you found happiness after all the sadness you'd already endured when I knew you. I'm writing because my nephew, the boy I raised after my sister died, just got married, and at his wedding last weekend, he gave a speech about the man who taught him what it means to be a father. He talked about watching you navigate single parenthood, about how you showed him that being a good parent isn't about being perfect, it's about being present. David remembered things I'd forgotten, how you used to bring extra sandwiches to school events and quietly offer them to other single parents who looked like they'd rushed straight from work, how you organized carpools for field trips so that other parents wouldn't have to take time off work, how you volunteered to help other fathers learn to braid hair and pack school lunches and all the mother things we suddenly had to figure out how to do. You probably don't remember David. He was quiet, serious, the kind of kid who watched everything and said little. But he remembered you. He remembered that you saw him struggling with the same things your own children were struggling with, and you included him. You made him feel less alone. At his wedding, he said, "The man who taught me the most about being a father was a widower, who probably never realized he was teaching anyone anything. He just showed up, every day, and did the work of loving his children even when that work was hard." Sam, I hope you don't mind that I still think of you as Sam. I want you to know something that I never had the courage to tell you 23 years ago. I didn't leave because your children weren't ready for me. I left because I wasn't ready for them. You were this incredible father, this man who'd reorganized his entire life around the needs of 2 grieving children, and I was terrified that I wasn't good enough to be part of what you'd built. I was terrified that I'd mess up the delicate balance you'd created, that I'd be the reason your family fell apart when you'd worked so hard to hold it together. I told myself it was about Sarah and Michael needing time to heal, but the truth was, I needed time to become the kind of woman who could love a man as devoted as you were without feeling like I was competing with that devotion. I hope you can forgive me for being a coward. I hope you can understand that sometimes people run from the best things in their lives because they don't believe they deserve them. I remarried a good man, Sam. I had 2 children of my own, and I tried to raise them with the same quiet dedication I watched you bring to everything you did. When they asked me about the most important lessons I'd learned about parenting, I told them about a man I once knew who taught me that love isn't about grand gestures. It's about showing up, every day, especially when showing up is the hardest thing in the world. My nephew tells me you're a grandfather now, that your children have learned to appreciate what they have in you. I'm so glad. You deserved to have your sacrifices recognized. You deserved to have your love returned. I wanted you to know that those years you spent alone weren't wasted, that the love you gave your children rippled out in ways you probably never realized. You helped raise my nephew just by being the kind of man worth watching. You helped raise my children by teaching me what real devotion looks like. Thank you, Sam. Thank you for showing a scared young woman what it means to put family first. Thank you for being the kind of father this world needs more of. I hope your grandchildren know how lucky they are. With admiration and affection, Patricia, I read that letter 3 times before I could fully process what she was telling me. All these years I'd thought Patricia left because my children made it clear she wasn't welcome. I'd carried guilt about not being able to help my kids accept her, about not being able to create space for love in a house that was still so full of grief. But she hadn't left because of Sarah and Michael. She'd left because she thought she wasn't good enough for us. Because she looked at our little family, broken but still functioning, grieving but still loving, and saw something she was afraid she might damage. I walked to my kitchen window and looked out at the yard where my grandchildren had played just last weekend, where Sarah had helped me plant a garden that wouldn't bloom until spring, where Michael had finally finished painting the fence I'd been working on for 2 years. Patricia was right about one thing. Love does ripple out in ways you don't expect. The love I'd given Sarah and Michael had somehow reached her nephew, had helped shape the man he became. And now that man was married, probably thinking about children of his own, carrying forward lessons he'd learned by watching me muddle through the hardest job I'd ever had. Maybe that's how it works. Maybe the love we give our children doesn't end with them. Maybe it keeps going, generation after generation, teaching people we'll never meet how to show up for the people who need them most. I folded Patricia's letter carefully and put it in the box where I kept Emma's letters and the legal documents that had brought my children back to me. Not because I needed to keep it as evidence, but because it was part of the story now. Part of the long, complicated, beautiful story of what it means to love people, even when loving them cost you everything you thought you wanted for yourself. That night, I called Sarah and told her about the letter, not because I needed her to feel guilty about Patricia, but because I wanted her to understand something important. The love we give doesn't disappear just because we can't see where it goes. "Dad," she said after I'd finished reading Patricia's words to her, "I think Mom would be proud of you, of all of us." "I think you're right," I told her, and for the first time since Emma died, I really believed it. 1 year later, exactly 1 year after the birthday dinner that never was, Sarah called me at 7 in the morning. "Dad, what are your plans for today?" "Well, it's my birthday, so I thought I'd celebrate by cleaning the gutters and maybe reorganizing the garage." I was joking, but only partially. Old habits die hard, and I'd spent so many birthdays alone that I'd gotten good at finding ways to stay busy. "Wrong answer. Be ready by 5 o'clock. Wear something nice. And Dad, prepare to be surprised." At exactly 5 o'clock, Michael pulled into my driveway, not alone but with all 4 grandchildren piled into his truck, all of them practically vibrating with excitement. "Come on, Grandpa," Marcus called through the window. "We have a surprise for you." "Where are we going?" "You'll see," Lily said with the sort of mysterious grin that 6-year-olds get when they think they're being incredibly sneaky. We drove to the community center downtown, the same place where Sarah had her high school graduation party, where Michael and Jennifer had their wedding reception. But tonight, the parking lot was fuller than I'd ever seen it. Inside, I stopped dead in the doorway. The room was decorated with photos, dozens of them covering every table and wall. Pictures of me with Sarah and Michael as babies, as toddlers, as school-aged children. Pictures from Little League games and school plays and Christmas mornings. Pictures of me teaching Michael to change a tire, of Sarah and me building her science fair project at the kitchen table. But more than that, there were people. So many people. My brother and his wife, who'd driven 12 hours from Phoenix. My sister and her family from Portland. Former co-workers from the construction company where I'd worked for 15 years. Teachers from Sarah and Michael's schools. Some retired now, but all smiling and holding plates of cake and acting like this was exactly where they wanted to be on a Tuesday evening. And at the center of it all was a banner that read, "Happy 71st birthday, Sam. Thank you for showing us what love looks like." Sarah appeared at my elbow, tears already streaming down her face. "Surprise, Dad." "How did you... Who are all these people?" "They're your people, Dad. The people whose lives you touched without even realizing it. When we started planning this party, we thought we'd invite family and maybe a few friends. But then we started making calls, and everyone had a story. Everyone remembered something you did, some way you helped or influenced or just showed up when they needed someone to show up." She led me to a table where a woman I didn't immediately recognize was sitting with a teenage boy. "Dad, this is Mrs. Chen. Do you remember her?" I looked more closely and suddenly I did. She was the mother of one of Michael's classmates, a single mom who'd seemed overwhelmed at every school event. "Mr. Thompson," she said, standing to hug me. "This is my son Kevin. He's 17 now, heading to college on a scholarship next year." The young man shook my hand with the sort of firm grip that suggested someone had taught him well. "Kevin, tell Mr. Thompson what you told me," Mrs. Chen prompted. "You probably don't remember me," Kevin said, "but you used to give my mom rides to parent-teacher conferences when our car was broken down, and you helped me with my Pinewood Derby car when I was in Scouts because my mom didn't know anything about tools." I did remember, vaguely. It had seemed like such a small thing at the time. "That car won second place," Mrs. Chen said. "But more importantly, you showed my son that there are men in this world who help people just because it's the right thing to do. He's been volunteering with younger kids ever since, teaching them what you taught him." And that's how the evening went. Person after person, story after story. All of them variations on the same theme. I'd done something small, something that seemed insignificant at the time, and it had mattered. It had rippled out in ways I never could have imagined. Patricia's nephew David was there, the young man who'd gotten married and given the speech that prompted his aunt to write to me. He brought his new wife, a lovely woman who thanked me for helping to raise the man she fell in love with. Former neighbors told me about the times I'd shoveled their driveways without being asked, about how I'd helped them jumpstart cars and fix broken sprinkler systems, and all the small kindnesses that neighbors do for each other when they remember they're part of a community. Teachers told me about the extra care I'd taken with school projects, about how I'd volunteered for field trip chaperone duty, and coached other single fathers through the complicated choreography of parent involvement. And through it all, my children and grandchildren watched with expressions I'd never seen before. Pride, yes, but also wonder. Wonder at discovering that their father and grandfather was more than just their father and grandfather, that he was a person who'd moved through the world leaving small traces of goodness everywhere he went. Near the end of the evening, Sarah asked for everyone's attention. "A year ago," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the room, "I told my father that he wasn't family anymore. It was the worst thing I've ever said to another human being, and I've spent the last year trying to make up for it." She looked directly at me. But tonight isn't about making up for anything. Tonight is about celebrating what we should have been celebrating all along. The man who taught us that family isn't about perfection, it's about persistence. It's about showing up every day, especially when showing up is hard. She paused, wiping her eyes. Dad, you didn't just raise Michael and me. You raised an entire community of people who learned what love looks like by watching you love us. And we wanted you to see that. We wanted you to understand that the life you built, the love you gave, it didn't just stop with us. It kept going. Michael stepped forward, holding something wrapped in tissue paper. This is from all of us, Dad. All of us whose lives you touched. Inside was a leather-bound book, and when I opened it, I found page after page of handwritten letters. Letters from every person in that room, telling me how I'd impacted their lives. Stories I'd forgotten, moments I'd thought were insignificant, all of them preserved in the careful handwriting of people who'd been paying attention, even when I hadn't realized anyone was watching. On the last page, in Emma's handwriting, was a letter I'd never seen before. My dearest Sam. If you're reading this, it means Sarah and Michael have finally learned what I've always known, that you are the best man I've ever known, and the best father our children could have asked for. I wrote this letter on the day before I died, and I asked Margaret Wilson to keep it sealed until your children were ready to give it to you. I hoped it would be on a happy occasion, when they'd learn to appreciate what they had in you. I need you to know that every sacrifice you made was worth it. Every sleepless night, every missed opportunity, every moment when you chose our children over your own comfort. It all mattered. You didn't just raise Sarah and Michael. You raised them to be the kind of people who could learn from their mistakes, who could choose love over pride, who could build the kind of family that celebrates the people they love instead of taking them for granted. You kept every promise you made to me, Sam. You loved our children unconditionally. You showed them what it means to be devoted to family. You taught them that love isn't about keeping score. It's about showing up. Thank you for being exactly the man I fell in love with every single day for all these years. I love you forever, Emma. I closed the book and looked around that room full of people. My people. People whose lives had somehow been touched by the simple act of trying to be a good father to two children who'd lost their mother too soon. This was Emma's final gift. Not just the revelation of how much I'd been loved, but the understanding that love multiplies when you give it away. That the best way to honor the people we've lost is to keep loving the people we still have, even when loving them is complicated, even when they forget how to love us back. Thank you, I said, though the words felt too small for what I was feeling. All of you. Thank you for reminding me that no one raises children alone. Thank you for being part of our family's story. And as I looked around that room full of faces, some I'd known for decades, some I was just meeting, I realized that Emma had been right about everything. Love doesn't end when people die. It doesn't disappear when children grow up and move away. It just keeps going, rippling out in ways we can't always see, touching lives we never expected to touch. This is what it means to raise children. Not just to love them, but to love them in a way that teaches them how to love others. Not just to show up for them, but to show up for them in a way that shows them how to show up for the world. I raised my children alone after Emma died, but I never raised them in isolation. I raised them in a community of people who were all trying to figure out how to love each other well. And somehow, despite all my mistakes and imperfections, it worked. My name is Sam, and I'm 71 years old. A year ago, I thought I'd lost my family. Tonight, I realized I'd been building a much bigger family than I ever imagined. One person, one small kindness, one day at a time. Sometimes that's all love is. Showing up every day and trusting that it matters even when you can't see how. It always matters. It always ripples out. It always comes back home. Thank you for watching. Please don't like and subscribe to the channel for more stories like these. Also, let me know in the comments which part of the story did you enjoy. Thank you.